Welcome to the Rethinking Humanity podcast, where we dive deeper into what makes us human and what causes us to thrive. I'm Lacey Delane.
Hi, I'm Sonya Larrea.
And we are so excited to have you guys tonight for episode 44. We are talking about the worst four-letter word there is, guys. That is the word work.
Wow.
And tonight, we're going to be talking about post-work and anti-work. If you've never heard those terms before, stay with us. We're going to share what they are and kind of dive into what they are in a little bit more detail as well. Sonya, will you tell everybody how they can find us other than through the platform that they're watching us on right now or through their favorite podcast listening platform?
Absolutely. Follow us on Instagram and check out our website, RethinkingHumanity.us. And also look for us on YouTube under Rethinking Humanity Podcast.
Yes, do. We don't have a backslash on YouTube yet, but we're going to get there. So just search on YouTube for Rethinking Humanity Podcast. We're there. We have some cool videos that are additional, that are of Frome, who's one of the guys that we like to talk about on the podcast. And then also all of our stuff since season 2 is on here. And our interviews. So check all that out. If you're with us right now on YouTube, hi, welcome.
Hello.
Thank you for being here. Say hello in the chat, please. We love to say hello to everybody who's with us and who's listening. Hi from the Youngs, Jason. Hi, so good to see you here. Yay, thanks for being here. That's exciting. I great to hear from you guys and great to have you here. Cool. So Sonya, tell me, what have you been reading? Have you been reading anything cool? This is one thing Sonya and I love to do is chat about what we're reading. And so what you got going, girl?
I'm reading this. It's the Bhagavad Gita. If people don't know what that is, it's like Indian scripture. It's a kind of equivalent to the Bible, but it's got a lot of good lessons in how one should live their life. But when I'm not reading this, I'm listening to a lot of podcasts, reading articles that Lacey and I share. We actually go, hey, we read this cool thing today. Or, I listened to something real interesting. So I'm kind of all over the place. Yeah.
Yeah. How are you liking this book, the Indian type scripture?
Oh, it's interesting because it's kind of like, it's philosophy. We both like philosophy. So it's through a philosophy class. So it's really sort of in the vein of philosophy where you have to kind of think about basically your actions. Like just to simplify it, like everything we do has like a cause and effect.
Yeah.
When you go out in the world and you're kind, or if you're not kind, just to simplify it, it comes back to you one way or the other. So it's just a little snippet of that.
That's cool. I like and I find an interest in reading on like Buddhist stuff. I haven't read really much on that, but Frome writes a lot about Buddhist Zen Buddhism and that kind of thing, and so there's threads of it in his writing. But that just kind of made me think of, alternative, non-Christian scriptures or whatever.
Correct,
and so religious text.
Yeah, there's that vein, the same themes run in different texts.
Yes.
And so it's always fascinating kind of to learn about that. So how about you? What are you reading?
Oh, I'm so excited to share this one.
I know.
Okay, so I am reading Civilized to Death.
Wow.
By Christopher Ryan. And I texted Sonya earlier today and I was like, I really want you to read this book because I read his first book, Sex at Dawn, several years ago. And actually this one was written in 2019. So it's not that new. But I really like how he writes about who we are as a species and how we live for most of human history, which is, and what he writes is very different than what you will find if you go looking for this information in other sources, or I don't even want to say other sources. Other sources is accurate, but like most mainstream sources, because if you look in most mainstream sources, you're going to hear, the verbiage that we were noble savages and things were horrible and difficult. And really, we lived as hunter-gatherers for most of human history. We've only been post-agriculture for 10,000 years. And so I love the points that he's making in here about how natural it is for us to be cooperative with each other is a part of like how we've lived for so long since the onset of human history, because we needed that in order to survive in these hunter-gatherer groups. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, it's just very interesting, and it really turns a lot of these assumptions about how competitive we are and how we're just naturally at the core, hateful and, jealous and all these things, which society or culture would lead us to think is our natural state, when in all actuality, we've heard, from Wright, and we've talked about that's actually it's a result of our environment, the environment that we're in, and the type of environment, socioeconomic environment that we're doing life in.
Do you think this author is anti a civilized society, would you say, or?
No, he's very realistic about the reality that we're not going back,
Right.
But what he is advocating for is that we take a look at who we really are as a species and how we've lived for so long, and find ways to accommodate that instead of, forcing ourselves to do things in a way that really is against our nature, which, I mean, it's so much in line with the themes of our podcast,
Right. And maybe get some lessons from how we used to live and apply those today.
Right. Exactly. I mean, it's amazing what he says in here. He talks about how, like, the foragers that have been living in different locations throughout the world, anthropologists have noted commonalities between how they live, even if they've been not associated with each other at all. They don't know each other. They, but they do the same things. And it's because they work, and that's part of kind of who we are as a species. So it's just so interesting. I'm 26 pages in, so it's still early. But good stuff.
Keep us posted.
Yes. Hey, it will be awesome to have him on the podcast. I would be so excited. But yes, I will keep you posted for sure. Okay. Just wondering, to those of you who are listening, do you think work is a 4-letter word? What do you think, Sonya?
Oh, it's a loaded question, because we had a podcast before this one. We're doing a series on work. And I think for most of us, for myself, I would define work as a necessity. I think we've seen work as being something noble, something to aspire to have a job that's meaningful. So I would say, though, now we're in an era that we know, the Great Resignation, where people are rethinking work.
Yeah. I mean, I say it a little bit tongue in cheek and jokingly, and I just kind of did a little tease on my Instagram story about, like, we're going to be talking about, the worst 4-letter word that there is. I didn't give any other context. So if you're here because of that post, welcome, and I'm glad you're here. But I mean, I think that like we talked about in the last episode, the pandemic has really helped us to start to rethink our approach to work and what it looks like and what it means. And the 2 articles that we're going to take a look at tonight, I think, do a really good job of helping us to understand why we would call it a 4-letter word. I think it's very easy to just be very accepting of it for what it is, and because it's just so much what we're used to doing. And the two articles we're going to look at tonight really take a deeper look and kind of pulls back the veneer behind it. And then also Fromm writes a little bit about this too in The Sane Society, which is the book that we've been talking about in season 2. So let's start with the New York Times article.
Okay.
That one is called "Even with a Dream Job, You Can Be Anti-Work." So, share away if you want to start, Sonya, on this one.
Well, I mean, I think that the idea is, as I was mentioning earlier, is that we we have this illusion. I think work can become, everything to someone. In this article, the person writing it is saying, even though he loves his job, he's realizing that it's encompassing every part of his life. Waking up and thinking about the job. Even when you're having leisure time, he's thinking about the job. So it becomes more than the job. It becomes, I think, just your identity and how you're living and what you're doing. And it's all, to me, it's overwhelming to imagine that. And he's admitting, he actually likes what he does, but he realizes how it seeps into every aspect of his life.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know this part in the article, I kind of highlighted it, and he says, I love my job, but yet a lot of times my job can feel like an all-consuming hell. I have a wife and kids and 2 cats, but work is the first thing I think about every morning and the last thing I worry about every night. My job has dibs on my mind and my time, and it gets the best of my attention and creativity. And it is the subject of my deepest neuroses and my most intractable stresses. And I think we can all relate to that. I mean, I think it's easy for us to say, no, work isn't the most important thing. But then I think he describes it really well, because it's like, well, wait a minute, though. It's the last thing on my mind before I go to sleep. It's the first thing on my mind whenever I wake up. It really commands most of my time. And I have the most anxiety because of it. So how is it not the most important thing?
Well, I was going to back up a little bit. There's something I think that we should probably define.
Yes.
So I think typically when we say work, or if someone says work to me, I think of paid employment. Because we know there's a lot of labor that we do that isn't paid.
Sure.
You can name those, childcare, elderly care, just your day-to-day activities that you're laboring in. But so what I believe that we're focusing on at this point is the idea that you need a job that is paid to be able to live, to be able to eat, to be able to have a roof over your head. So if you put it in that context, what he says is very true. In his case, he's able to, I guess, enjoy what he's doing, but it's still, there's this anxiety because am I going to have a job a year from now? And how much money do I need? And is my career going where I need it to go? Because he's dependent. We're all dependent on that. So then if you put it in the context of a job that you don't like, then you're really suffering, because on top of needing the money, you're going somewhere or doing something that is really, I don't know, horrible, demeaning, or just boring, whatever terminology you want to use.
Right. Yeah. At that point, it's really difficult. And it's difficult, I think, for our bodies and for our minds and our mental health to just go so hard all the time, even in a good situation, in a good job, or like a job that you enjoy, a job that you like, or a healthy job. So I appreciate you clarifying that, because you're right. We do work a lot, even if we're not getting paid for it, right? I mean, you think about the mom who's at home taking care of the home and the kids, or the dad who's at home taking care of the home and the kids. That's work, but it's not paid. Maybe caring for an older family member, that's also work. Going to the grocery store is work. Running errands is work.
Exactly.
These are things that, and I mean, if you think about it, like, there are people who are hired to do these things, and they, it's like a job, right? But when we're doing it for ourselves, we're not paid for it. But that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about work that you do when you're contracted, or whenever you're hired by a company or a family or a group of people, to do a job in exchange for income. Right. So, yes. So I love how he points out how much this is really a big part of his life, and it kind of dominates his life. And he says that he didn't really realize that until the pandemic, which again, we've talked about that many, many times. But it's certainly the case for me that it took me getting sick and not having a job for a while to go, oh, this is not the most important thing.
Yeah. And I know we've discussed the pandemic, but I would say we could keep emphasizing what a big change that was globally. I mean, everything stopped. So you have to imagine the millions of people who were now actually sitting at home or having to do some self-reflection. I mean, that's just astounding. Like, I don't know when that will happen again. Maybe not in our lifetime, but that has really changed how we think or started to have people thinking like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Does this make sense? And also the fact that work changed. People started working from home. Yeah. So things that we didn't think were possible became possible. So there's like a lot of shifts going on in how we're defining even work.
Yeah. And he starts this article talking about how reluctant workers are and have been to take jobs that they would have easily taken before the pandemic, lower paying jobs, jobs that most people really wouldn't like to take. Maybe it's retail, maybe it's fast food, those types of things. And this was, I think, October. I can't remember exactly when he wrote this, but it was a couple months ago. It wasn't super recent. But there's a lot of reasons why they're reluctant to take these jobs. And good for them that they're going, hey, guess what? I'm worth more than this, like I need to be paid a wage and I need to have a work-life balance. Maybe they, had unemployment assistance, their stimulus money helped. But the thing is that, many of them are actually rethinking what does work actually mean? Like he's saying that, yes, there's a lot of reasons why on the surface they could be hesitant to take these jobs, but basically it's actually something that maybe we're realizing like, hey, maybe we're a little too obsessed with work. Maybe employment is not the only way that I can find meaning in life. And then maybe like sometimes like no job is better than a terrible job or even a bad job.
Yeah, I think as you were saying earlier, it's not just the wages. I'd say people are thinking of their physical health, their mental health. They're thinking of maybe there's another option of how I can live. And maybe I don't have to do the traditional type of lifestyle. I was seeing a couple little videos where people literally, they said, I'm not going to have a house. They're now living like in a, what's it called? Like the mobile kind of
RV or something.
Yeah. And they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy. Like I don't have this responsibility, or my husband doesn't have to work, or I'm, they're working part-time, or there's just this whole shift in how we are looking at our lives, what's important. And I think that's what the pandemic did, is saying, wow, how much time do I have and what do I want to do with it? Do I want to play by my guitar? Do I want to, read more? Do I want to spend more time with my children or my spouse or significant other? I think it opened up all these possibilities.
Yeah. And at the same time, there's a group of thinkers who've been studying and like pushing for this wholesale reprisal of the idea that work, or the role that work plays for us in wealthy societies. And their ideas have been dubbed post-work or anti-work, which is obviously the title of this episode. And so they've been looking at all this and advocating for this for years now. And, now it's coming to the light it's not coming to the light, but it's coming to the mass audience in a way that is different than it could have been without the pandemic and the challenges of the pandemic. And now, people are like yearning for freedom. I think they're like realizing it's kind of like whenever you go out of the country and you live in another country, you're able to see your own culture and your own life in a very different way than you can when you're in it, you know? Or like an unhealthy relationship. If you're in it, it's really hard sometimes. It can be really hard to see it for what it is. And until you're out of it, then you can see it more clearly. And so it's kind of that with what they're talking about. The pandemic kind of separated us from our work in a way to where we could see it from a different angle. And now people are starting to say, hey, maybe we could do things differently.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about this, the post work. I think that's a hard concept for people to imagine because the world, at least that I've always lived in, you definitely work. So the fact is that people are envisioning actually a whole different life. And I think what's interesting that you said earlier that it doesn't even have to do about the wages. There are people who have very high salaries, but they determine that they're in humane conditions. Maybe they're working like 98 hours a week, and they're just literally just existing to work. Yeah. And if you think about that, what's the purpose of that? Especially if your life is now shortened. I mean, I think there's like a lot of soul searching on what is this going to look like. And we knew this was coming, by the way, with artificial intelligence. Yep. Also, the environment plays a big role here with climate change, because obviously the more we're producing and the more goods we're consuming, the more we're damaging the environment. So there is also an argument there to work less.
That's a great argument. I didn't even think about that until we discussed it recently, but I love that.
Yeah, I really do. And I think you and I talked about that in this article. There's a really funny part that it says that there was a recent tweet that proclaimed, "I do not want to have a career," wrapped up over 400,000 likes. That's the kind of interesting, that statement. Because I think, at least I grew up that, having a career was really important, and also the type of career you had and how it reflected, it sort of was a signal in society, like who you were and how much income you made and how valuable you were or weren't.
Mm-hmm. I totally remember thinking that and growing up that way and going to college and working hard for that reason,
Yeah.
What, didn't you have a poem though that was really good that you wanted to share?
I wanted to say this. This is also really good. It says in her poem, "The Summer Day," Mary Oliver, she's a famous author, asks, "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" And then the author writes, "My reply for now is simple. Sit on the porch." That's what I would reply, by the way.
Well, mine would be, I'll travel the world. That's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
But there's a value in slowing down. I think that's the point. And that's also something that I learned from my time during the lockdown and the pandemic, of just like slowing down. And at first it was really hard. Like I was like, what? I don't know what to do with myself. And that sounds a lot like something Fromm has said in the past and in other writings, that part of the reason why we're so compulsively busy is because we can't handle, if we're still and quiet, then it's like all the stuff that we're trying to suppress and we're hiding, we're not facing, comes to the surface, and then we feel all this anxiety.
Sure.
And so that's, we can't bear it, basically.
Absolutely. I was going to say, because, we do bring up Fromm, the Sane Society. I found a few pages here that he talks about work, and I was going to bring that up. I thought it was really interesting that he talks about, they do studies if people are satisfied or unsatisfied. And this was back in the 50s. And he says, in an attempt to answer this question, we must differentiate between what people consciously think about their satisfaction and what they feel unconsciously. And that's really fascinating, because he goes into the fact that although people will say, consciously, oh, I'm happy with work, I like work. Unconsciously, they're not. They have ulcers, they have insomnia, they have depression. And so he gets to the root of kind of what you're saying. I think it's almost like a brainwash that we're supposed to be happy, right? Or if we have that quote unquote good job. But he's saying in society that that's not, this is the difference between the consciously thinking about being satisfied and what they feel unconsciously. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, that's super good. And it's a good point because it's, I think in many situations we can say, yeah, everything's fine, but unconsciously it's not. And we feel it, and that manifests itself in different ways in our body, in our attitudes, in our mood. And maybe it feels easier to just pretend that everything's fine and it's not a problem, but we can't really, it's kind of like pain from trauma. It's ignoring it doesn't make it go away or doesn't make it not exist.
Right.
And the best way to be able to just work through it is just to accept it for what it is, feel it, and, move on.
The part that Fromm discusses that I think is really relevant today is, and we've discussed this, is that one of the ways that we try to counteract our dissatisfaction is because of monetary and prestige incentives, which I just talked about, like money and having like this title. And he says, and undoubtedly these incentives produce considerable eagerness to work, especially in the middle and higher echelons of the business hierarchy. But it is one thing that these incentives make people work, and it is quite another thing whether the mode of this work is conducive to mental health and happiness. So that's really interesting because, I think that he's pointing out the obvious that, we kind of tell ourselves, oh, we're making good money, or wow, I have this great position, so I'm supposed to be happy, or this should define me. And really unconsciously, we're not satisfied or happy.
Yeah. And I think that, reminds me of this article again, where the author of The Dream Job, even with the dream job, you can be anti-work. He says, there's folks now that are questioning some of the bedrock ideas in modern life, especially life in America. What if paid work is not the only worthwhile use of one's time? I think this is a great question to ponder. I invite all of you who are listening to think about that question. What if paid work is not the only worthwhile use of one's time, of my time? What if crushing it in your career is not the only way to attain status and significance in society? I mean, that is it's such a striking question because it's such a foreign concept. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
What if electing to live a life that is not driven by the neuroses and obsessions of paid employment is considered a perfectly fine and reasonable way to live? Hey,
radical idea.
Yes.
And again, Fromm brings this up in this chapter. He talks about use our imagination, look at children and see what they do, like at play, and saying that there are more meaningful ways to live rather than to be working. Exactly what you're saying. He says the same thing.
Yes.
That we long to spend our energy on something meaningful, that we feel refreshed if we can do so, and that we are quite willing to accept rational authority if what we are doing makes sense. And I don't think a lot of it has made sense for people. And this is kind of where we're at.
For sure. Well, it's hard for it to make sense when you're one little piece of the whole puzzle of the machine. Like if I'm working for a company that we're building tables and selling tables, and I just put the leg on the table, I have zero context for how that all, and no participation in the start to finish, the interaction with the customer. So I think that makes perfect sense. I think it connects perfectly.
And so some people would probably push back because we've talked about this before. Well, then who's going to do that? Who's going to put that piece of the leg on? And so my answer would be AI. And then my other answer would be, for those of us that don't want to be doing that job, that's why we would have UBI, Universal Basic Income.
Right.
as a basis, for living.
For sure. And then the other answer to that question is part of what made capitalism not so life-sucking for the 19th century, which is the craftsmanship that came along with that. And it was, the one person built a table for another person instead of compartmentalizing each of the different parts of building the table. I think that's another thing to mention. There's one other thing before we move on to the other article that I wanted to say from this one. And he mentions a Reddit forum that's /anti-work. And it's for, quote unquote, for those who want to end work. And so there's hundreds of thousands of people posting in there and, reading and giving information in there. So I think that's really interesting. I'm not a big Reddit user, but if you guys are, I want to invite you to go check it out. He says that had been following it for a long time, and he actually really enjoyed it. So, I think that this idea of post-work, anti-work is something that we are going to see and be faced with a lot more in the coming years, in the next 10 years, 15 years. It's actually something that Andrew Yang talked a lot about. Well, he talked about it in his book. He didn't really talk about it on the campaign trail. But as you mentioned, Sonya, automation is something that is accelerating, that is replacing human labor financially, rationally. It makes a lot of sense for automation to take over human labor. And in that case, I think if we do things in a way that makes sense, we get two things. We get, excuse me, we get technology companies with a lot of money, and we get lots of people without jobs, and a need for those people to have a purpose that's not found in work, which is where most of us find our purpose right now, as we're saying, but also an income, a need for them to have an income. And that's where the universal basic income idea comes in and makes a lot of sense. So I think that this is something that we're going to see a lot more in the years ahead, and have to be faced with a lot more in the years ahead. And I think basic income and automation, and even what you said earlier about climate change and the environment, have a lot of overlap with that.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're living through a big shift right now. Who knows how that's going to go, but I don't see it changing. In fact, I see what you're saying as people are going to have less of the traditional jobs. I think there's going to be a need to find meaning outside of work. I think we have to look at how we're taking care of those that are the caretakers in our society, whether it be for disabled, elderly, children. I think there's just going to be a complete. We're moving towards that shift. I don't know how quick we're going to get there, but I think if we're going to be a society that cares about actually living on the planet, these are going to be necessary changes. It's a completely different way of thinking than what we are used to. And I think it's going to have to start even with early education.
That's interesting.
Yeah, because think about it. When you're going to school, if you learn that you're a valuable member of society, because you're, I don't know, painting or, helping or doing some other form of labor, not the traditional labor that we know, or maybe just that you're valuable because you're human. That's a very radical way of thinking that we've been sort of trained that our goal is to have a job per se.
Sure. Well, I mean, think about the question that a lot of people ask kids. What do you want to be when you grow up?
I know.
And that is inextricably linked to a job, right?
Right.
So
I could say off the top of my head is, how do you want to be a contributing member of society?
Mm-hmm. I mean,
and that may not be having a quote unquote traditional job.
right. I mean, another way to ask it would be, how do you want to spend your time? And it doesn't even have to be when you grow up. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
How do you prefer to spend your time? And what's interesting about that is when you get to that question, then you got to know yourself a little bit. Because, like, how do I want to spend my time? Oh, how do I want to spend my time? What do I like? What do I find interesting? What do I enjoy? And if we don't know that, then it's going to be, that's what makes this whole post-work, I think, idea a little bit scary for people, because they're like, what am I going to do? I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't even know what I like and who I am. Yeah, exactly. And I would argue that if that's the case, then that's plenty of evidence that we need to do something different, because there's a whole nother world of life and human experience that we get whenever we know ourselves, whenever we know what we enjoy, and then whenever we engage in those things. So I want to throw out a question, Sonya, to our listeners and also to you. What I want you guys to think about, like, what would your life look like if you didn't have a job? If, let's say, we got to this, fast forward 20 years or however many years, and we're in this post-work era. What is your life like? What would your life be without a job? What do you think? What would you do? How would you spend your time?
Well, I think it's an excellent question, because I think, as you said earlier, that people are a bit afraid. Like, how do I use that time if I don't have it structured, or if I'm not going to a workplace every day? But I think it does open up a lot of opportunities to do things very differently, whether that is travel around the world, I mean, or even in your own hometown, do something different, or take up a craft, or learn something, or be of service. I mean, I think this is where it gets challenging. I think that there's endless opportunities potentially. And they know from psychology, and I know you love the psychology, sociology, that it's really difficult when people have a lot of choices. You know, if you walked into somewhere and you only had 3 brands of cereal to buy, your brain can do this. But if you walk in and there's 100 brands of cereal, you start to get nervous and anxious. And so I think one of the challenges for people is what you said earlier, is being like, whoa, like, what am I going to do? And who am I? And so for myself, I think I would probably, just me personally, narrow down to some things that I've always wanted to do that I didn't have the time or the resources maybe, and start to do something different. And it could be something like, I want to learn Italian. Okay, let's go do that. I want to, write a book. I don't know. I'm just throwing stuff out there.
I'm sure those things would change over time too. Like, maybe you say, I want to learn Italian, you learn Italian, you go, okay, I'm going to go to Italy and check it out. And then you go to Italy and you learn about pasta, and you're like, oh, this is so cool. I want to learn how to make pasta and give it out to people in the neighborhood, whatever it is. I want to suggest that we wouldn't isolate ourselves. I want to suggest that. And I think that even though we do live in this highly digital world now, I do think that we, as a human species, we need interaction with each other. And so I think there's a lot of people who will be like, well, some people are just going to play video games all the time. Well, maybe some people will. And then maybe they'll get tired of it, because as human beings, we're social creatures. And so I think one of the things that would happen is that we would end up spending more time together in community, and we would do more together, which has been measured to show a higher quality of life and health whenever we are in community and in connection with other human beings.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I was actually going to bring up the whole communal thing. So they know that that's a measurement of happiness when you're living a more communal life, when you're actually giving to others. And how that fits in with work is a lot of people who are working crazy hours and busy cannot do, you could argue, volunteer or be as involved in a community because they're literally working 24/7 or coming home and doing what you have to do at home, or, children, home, spouse, animals. So how much can you give? So I think this would be a great opportunity for those who are, and even those who aren't necessarily interested, is you just get more involved because you have more time. You can stand outside and talk to your neighbor. And then, you have a problem with your car. I can help you. I'm a car mechanic or whatever. Where in the past, you couldn't even have the time to do it, or you're not even around to meet anybody to have that opportunity.
Exactly. I think you would see people helping each other more, people talking to each other more, people spending time with their neighbors. I think you'd see art and creativity, music, those types of things increase, because obviously those things take time. I mean, it takes time to paint a painting. It doesn't happen in 10 minutes. You know what I'm saying? It takes time to write a song. It takes time to read a book. These are all things that are super important. Maybe somebody who got a basic income, their passion maybe is research. And maybe they wanted to spend some time researching something. And since they have the time, they can do it. So, or improv, or that's something I'm going to start doing, or playing a sport, or going to the gym, or learning how to cook healthier, or farming. I mean, there's endless ways that we can spend our time in ways that are good for us, that have nothing to do with work. And maybe we'd be doing things that are similar to work, or that we do now consider work, but they wouldn't really be work because we'd be doing them because we wanted to. That's the difference. We'd be doing them from our own intrinsic place of motivation and for ourselves. And so it kind of reminds me of what you said earlier about work being like the definition of work. We'd all still be working, guys. It just wouldn't be for someone else.
True.
We'd be doing it for ourselves.
Yeah, it's going to be a real interesting evolution to see where this goes.
If you want to read a little bit more about this, I recommend Andrew Yang's book, The War on Normal People. He does talk about that, and also universal basic income. And then these articles, which we'll link in the YouTube in the description, and then also obviously in the description of the podcast episode if you're listening on audio. So we had another article, but we just totally blew right out of time, surprisingly. So we'll have to hold on to that one for next time. But we appreciate you all being with us. I hope you enjoyed it. And it is Thursday night. Tomorrow is Friday. It's almost a weekend, Sonya.
Yay.
Woo-hoo. So we hope you all have a great evening, and we will see you next time on the Rethinking Humanity podcast.
Thanks. Bye.